Hello, I'm Ron Johnson, and welcome to the Talking Joe G.I. Joe Conspiracy Podcast. Today we'll be asking, does the number 314159 mean anything to you? And we'll be asking, has Big Pie somehow taken over the G.I. Joe comic to insert the number 314 into it? We spoke to a man in the street who told us that he thought it was, at least maybe that's what I thought he said. But it was not the case. It just so happens to be the 314th issue of the long-running G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero comic. And now, live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. Today, we will be looking at G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, issue 314, which was released 26th of February 2025. Joining me, as always, to talk about it, it's a Real American, didn't come up with a pun, it's Tim Finn. How are you, Tim?
Hi, Mark, and hi, listeners. I am well.
Very good. Now, before we get into the meat of the episode, which probably could have a really pithy title for this bit of the segment for this segment in the show, but doesn't. Please, listeners, come up with a suggestion. So I'm just calling this News and Any Other Business.
Wait, shouldn't we call this like the briefing? Or like, isn't there some military term, some G.I. Joe term, some Larry Hama term? Mission brief? What's the thing that comes...
Debriefing.
No, that comes after.
Pre-beef briefing.
I think it's a briefing. Mission brief.
There's something. Let's give it a thought. Okay. Let's give it some thought for next time. So last time when we were talking about issue 313, there was a missing cover. So the Clayton Crane cover did turn up subsequently. That was a MegaCon Orlando exclusive cover featuring, can you guess which character, Tim?
Gristle.
Baroness. So that was that. Then I saw pointed out by somebody, and apologies, I've forgotten who it was, mentioned this to me, that we were talking about the Cobra Commander versus Destro cover for 313, the cover A, and what it reminded us of. What we forgot to mention was its similarity of a Cobra Commander versus Destro for issue 118.
Yeah, I guess 118 is so much about full body, and they're slightly offset to the left. They're not centered, but yes.
So for those who don't immediately picture it in their mind, this is a Michael Golden cover from 1991. It is Destro Search and Destroy Part 3. A cool cover.
Fun fact, I own it.
What? Jeebus. You kept that one hidden.
Anyway, but we're not here to talk about covers of G.I. Joe from 1991. We're here to talk about covers from G.I. Joe from 2025.
Wow. On that bombshell. And here's an advert for our Facebook group. Quite often, in the discussion, we might sort of follow up on a few points post the show. And last time I followed up with a post detailing the G.I. Joe Retaliation Cobra Commander outfit. I did a comparison of comic versus toy versus film. So if you're curious to see how those three things compare for that Cobra Commander black suit, head on over to the Facebook group where I shared a couple of pictures. Click, click, wink, wink, say no more. Creative team of issue 314 is a bit of a departure, Tim, because while it's brought to us from writer Larry Hama, as always, we have a new artist for this issue, artist Andrew Krahnke. I'm not 100% sure on the pronunciation, but until corrected otherwise, that's how I'm going to go with it.
For those of you who are hearing that 2-syllable word and imagining it spelled phonetically, it's Krahnke.
Indeed. Did you do any desk research on Andrew Krahnke to find out his other previous credits?
Yeah, so I've been really amazed and puzzled that G.I. Joe, this comic that has had this relatively steady creative team for the last year plus, right? One artist who's now done like 10 plus issues of G.I. Joe and who drew something for Image 10 plus years ago, and another artist who's now drawn 5 issues of G.I. Joe and who drew Green Lantern and The Flash, many years ago, but Geiger, like last month for Image Comics, for Ghost Machine. So Andrew Krahnke seemingly came out of nowhere, and this was a puzzle to me because I keep thinking that if someone's going to draw this book that's been around for so long, they'll have left a trail, but a trail that sort of winded in front of me. And the funny thing is that seemingly Andrew Krahnke sort of came out of nowhere, but not a lot of Googling reveals that he's actually been here all along. So his website, the About section, in its first sentence, in its second sentence, tells me plenty. Andrew Krahnke's an illustrator and comic book artist from northern Michigan, currently living on Long Island. He's a 2002 graduate of the Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art, and has been a full-time illustrator ever since. Like, oh, Andrew Krahnke is a QB. And many artists who have drawn G.I. Joe comics and who have designed G.I. Joe toys went to the Joe Kubert School, right? Ron Wagner, cover artist Andy Kubert, Lee Weeks, series artist Chris Mooneyham, who, drew the previous issue and will be back very, very soon to draw more issues. And similarly, not much Googling reveals, oh, Andrew Krahnke drew the second arc for an Image series, Tartarus, in 2020, which was written by Johnny Christmas, who's done stuff for Image in the last 10 years. And Andrew Krahnke also wrote and drew a series for Image called Bloodrik, Bloodrik, which Krahnke's website calls A Tale of Hunger and Stupidity. And he's drawn some webcomics and drawn some pitches, and then presumably stuff that's not in comics, because comics is hard, comics doesn't pay well, and if you are a freelance illustrator, you are probably trying to get drawing jobs from all sorts of places and categories and companies, not just comics publishers. So I would love to read an interview with him or conduct an interview with him and ask all sorts of questions.
Say, Tim, what are you doing Saturday, 8th of March? Just asking out of, entirely randomly there. Yeah.
Oh, one more thing. What's really, and I'll get to this when we record a later episode of Talking Joe, what's even more shocking is too strong, but surprising that this artist seemingly came out of nowhere to draw an issue of G.I. Joe. Very, very soon, he's drawing another and also writing it. And this reminds me of some of the artists that Skybound has found to draw the Energon Universe G.I. Joe comics, who are excellent but unknown to me. And Skybound has really high standards and really good aesthetic values. And, like the Cobra Commander miniseries. When Skybound picks an artist to draw G.I. Joe comics, I tend to always be happy about it. So there's this sort of funny question mark in my mind. Who's this Andrew Krahnke guy? Like, how does he get to draw an issue of G.I. Joe? Oh, no, I like this. Good.
Yeah. We're talking about his future issue being the Silent Missions Roadblock, which is coming out in April. So presumably, these 2 issues, he has put himself onto the radar of Alex Antone, and he has been added to his Rolodex and whipped out for these 2 issues. So it'd be interesting to sort of find out a little bit more about the equation that led to him working on these two books and why that choice was made.
One last tiny observation. In my mind, artists who draw G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, are more, finger quotes, established, which is just a jerky way of saying known by me. But, just 4 years ago, an artist, Kuber Bayal, who drew a great issue of G.I. Joe a year and a half before the end of the IDW issue, right? I didn't know who he was, but he had drawn comics for, Xenoscope and also Dynamite, or Dynamite came after his issue of G.I. Joe. So, I'm not the editor who's looking for new artists or who is fielding submissions from artists. And I'm psyched that the editors of both versions of G.I. Joe have been getting good artists to do G.I. Joe.
Yep. Colorist is Francesco Segala, as usual, I think we can say at this point in time, with Sabrina del Grosso Flatter. Letterer is once again Pat Brousseau, editor Alex Antone, publication design Jillian Crabb, production design Richard Mercado, and creative consultant is Diana Davis.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Cover A is drawn by series cover artist Andy Kubert and new series cover colorist Laura Martin. What a surprise. Man, if you told me that Laura Martin, then known as Laura Dupuy, who colored The Authority back in, was it 2000, 2001, who was my favorite colorist of 2000 and 2001, and who colored the John Cassaday Astonishing X-Men, and then also the John Cassaday first arc on Marvel's Star Wars, right? Like, very smart color artist. If you had told me 10 or 15 years ago that she'd be coloring some G.I. Joe work, you could have also knocked me over with a feather. So this is very exciting. Andy Kubert draws a really wonderful and kind of strange image where we are looking up at the Tomahawk piloted by Wild Bill, and three Joes are jumping out of it: Tunnel Rat, Sherlock, and Tripwire. This is fun because we haven't seen Tripwire in basically forever. I don't remember seeing him in 275 when we definitely saw everyone, but I'm going to assume we saw him in 275. We've seen Sherlock once or twice since the series restarted. We have not seen Tunnel Rat in a very long time. We probably saw him in 275. In some ways, he's a favorite character of mine, so that's really fun. We have not seen him front and center on a cover since, what's the Andy Kubert cover from Marvel? Is it like 115? It's got the miscolored roadblock.
Yeah, 113.
113.
Yeah.
So we're in the sewers. There are two alley vipers. There's Roadblock, miscolored as a Caucasian, and then Tunnel Rat. And then maybe we haven't seen Tunnel Rat front and center on a cover since, what's the Ron Wagner Special Missions cover? Also in a sewer with Spearhead and Max and Tunnel Rat. Is it?
Are we just talking about covers that you own now?
Anyway. So it's fun to see Tunnel Rat.
Special Missions 21.
Thank you. Special Missions 21.
That's another great Tunnel Rat cover. Yeah, good. Cool.
Okay, so what strikes me about this cover is I've been sort of wondering why Andy Kubert is sticking around on this book. And I don't say that cynically. I say that sort of happily and pleasantly surprised, because I keep sort of thinking like it's, 1989 and like, well, no one wants to stick around on G.I. Joe. It's a hard book to draw. Or, well, Andy Kubert will get offered more high profile work like X-Men or Batman. And now we're at the point where Andy Kubert has done high profile work like X-Men and Batman and has come back to G.I. Joe. I think some of that is because maybe he and Larry Hama know each other, because editor Hama gave Andy Kubert some of his early work in comics. I think it might be that Andy Kubert, this is a guess, I have not spoken to him. I think he might have an affinity for this kind of book and imagery because he's the son of the famous Sergeant Rock artist, and some of Andy Kubert's first work in comics was Sergeant Rock. And there aren't really any war books out there, but G.I. Joe is sort of a war adjacent book, people with guns and explosions. And you don't get to draw covers like this on almost any other book. And, maybe SKYBOUND just pays really well for covers to keep someone of Mr. Kubert's status around. Okay, what's weird about this cover? So I'm delighted that Kubert's still here. And the letters page, they say he's sticking around, which gets a big thumbs up for me. What's weird about this cover is that it's this Andy Kubert sort of slight fisheye lens effect, which I am used to, but I'm always surprised again when I see it, that he slightly exaggerates his perspective so that things that are close are a little bit bigger, like Tonorat's boot, and things that are further away get kind of scrunched, like the back of the helicopter. And this is a really startling camera angle, and I kind of feel like if you had the toy and these 4 action figures and a camera, you actually couldn't pull off this angle. And that's really fun that Kubert can and does, and also, in a fun way, really weird. This is the kind of exaggeration that you only get from a talented artist who's sort of thinking about space and compressing it in interesting stylistic ways.
I think to echo what you're saying, it's the kind of image that can only really exist in comics as a drawing, because from a literal perspective point of view, you just can't get it to work any other way.
Yeah, Kubert is sort of shrinking the length and width of the tomahawk in ways that the actual object couldn't and wouldn't. And like if you did this in a CG animated movie, you'd have to cheat your models. But this is just an exaggerated drawing that represents a moment from a comic, and everyone's firing. So, and getting fired at. So it's just really, really fun. I am a little sad that the tomahawk is miscolored. I want it to be beige, not green, although maybe, Mark, this is where you tell me about a recolored tomahawk toy that I don't remember. Convention exclusive, perhaps fun school in India.
I just had a quick look. It looks like there isn't a green tomahawk, as far as I can tell.
Okay,
so.
Well, also, if it was beige, then Wild Bill, who's this similar green, and Tonorat, who's got some similar green, and Tripwire, who's got some similar green, they would stick out a little bit more from the vehicle, but that's okay. And hey, even on page 1, it's beige, but that's okay. And then lastly, I will say, as excited as I am to see Laura Martin coloring a G.I. Joe cover, this cover is a little bit muted in its color treatment. There is a little bit of saturation on the sort of flashes from the weapons, but the red of the fiery smoke in the background is an orange brown, and the greens of Tunnel Rat, the greens of Wild Bill, the greens of the Tomahawk, these are sort of grayed out greens, for example. And I do feel like the colorists who have colored the previous 13 covers for this run would have more saturated colors. And that is my preference, because G.I. Joe is about sort of bolder colors, even these kind of realistic characters. And I really want a cover to pop. Although these characters are A, lit from below by, searchlights, and B, it's at night, and C, Laura Martin is a very smart colorist, so I'll go with her. But I do hope that if she colors more covers, there'll be a little bit more saturated colors that pop. Cover B is this same image, just the inked artwork, black and white, no colors. It looks great, and as with all of Andy Kubert's black and white covers, you get a real sense of what the light source is and how much information he's giving his color artist, whoever that is. These are the light sources, and this is where the shadows are going, right? Not just cast shadows, but in some cases he's the star on the side of the tomahawk, right? That's got a cast shadow over half of it from Tunnel Rat, but Kubert doesn't ink that in solid black. He inks it in with directional lines that match the contours of the tomahawk, which just one more example of it, adding some oomph and direction. Oh, one last thing. I think that's dry brush on the rotor blade. Sort of whirls, like on the top left, sort of above to the left of the G and the OE of G.I. Joe, or I don't know, maybe that's just a pen. Cool cover.
Yeah, he's having. You can see in the black and white that he's having a bit of fun with this. That he's looks like he's using brushwork. He's maybe flicking some white paint with a toothbrush or similar, and he's doing sort of grey tones as well to like inform the camouflage on tunnel rat.
Yeah,
and some of the other elements.
I think that's an ink wash. I think he's watered down some ink to get a gray tone. Yeah. Very fun cover. I do wish it was brighter and a little crazier.
And if you wanted a beige tomahawk, hey, buy this cover and colour it yourself. Have a go.
You know what? Actually, I'm holding the printed comic book in my hand right next to a JPEG of this image on the Diamond website. And this might be the difference between CMYK and RGB, sort of files for print and files for screens. But the JPEG, the colors are more saturated. So I am wondering if, like, the blue of Sherlock's pants is really more of a like blue and much more different than the sort of gray blue of Tunnel Rat's pants. So I'm wondering if maybe in the printing the colors got a little washed out, or in the sort of Photoshop clicking from one kind of file to another somewhere in the production process. Anyway, I still like the cover. Cover C is the 1:10 ratio variant. It is drawn and colored by Francis Portela. It's one more in the series of, quote, camouflage covers. This time it's Stalker leaning forward in a really cool pose, but making eye contact with you. He's got some cool, serious attitude in his face. He's holding a very awesome, strange machine gun that I don't understand, that kind of looks like a machine gun and a video camera had a baby, and I love it. And he doesn't have full contour lines where his arms and his legs end and the background behind him starts, but the green camouflage pattern of the background sort of becomes synonymous with the green camouflage of his body, even though he's technically in front of it. I know I ask this question every 5 minutes now on Talking Joe. Mark, how much is this costume or accessory informed by the classified toys?
I don't recognize the accessory. I think Stalker came with a quite relatively faithful toy version of his main gun.
Are there two Stalkers? One that's kind of the original, and then one that's a exaggerated original?
Yeah. They had two classified releases. One which was a sort of a darker, more muted camo, and then a follow-up release which was a sort of a color scheme that was closer to his original 83 release.
Can I just point out, I'm just going to take a moment. I have this pet peeve in comics, and this cover does not do this, which is why I want to talk about it for a moment. There are some color artists who, when they get like an Iron Man comic or a Transformers comic, like in lots of places on Iron Man or a Transformer, they will find a little thing to be a glowing light. And on Iron Man, I really think it should just be the circle in his chest and maybe his eyes. Certainly the palms of his hands if he's blasting you, but not like lots of little circles and bits on his chest and waist and legs and arms, because it becomes distracting. And not that there's anything on this machine gun that Stalker is holding that is like screaming to be a glowing light. I do see two red lights, but they're not like glowing. But if this was colored by a lesser color artist, I can imagine all of those ovals and rectangles on this machine gun would be like catnip for a color artist who's out of control to like make them glowing things that would distract me. And thus ends a segment of Tim's pet peeves that actually were not a part of this cover. Mark, are there any retailer exclusive covers for A Real American Hero issue 314?
Yeah, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes talking about a cover that doesn't exist, Tim, to echo your last sentiments. There isn't a retailer exclusive for this issue, 314, as best I can tell. And there isn't one credited on the inside front cover, which is normally a good sign as to whether something exists or not. But what does exist, or has been revealed, is a big alpaca comics exclusive EOD Warrior variant of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, issue 315, next issue, which is by Mike Choi. And on the front cover of that comic, Tim, are the two explosive ordnance disposal technicians Tunnel Rat, and Tripwire. So this variant cover for next issue features the main characters from this issue. So maybe we'll touch on this in a minute, but I think possibly this particular issue, 314, was originally intended to be issue 315, and they had this retailer exclusive with the cover tallying up to the intended interior. But then when things were shuffled around and this story became issue 314, I think they probably left the retailer exclusive cover still on that issue number. So there's a little bit of a potential disconnect without knowing the contents of 315 for sure. But I'm guessing that there's probably a bit of a disconnect between the story for this issue and the cover for next.
Yeah, and that's a fun cover. And I'm really excited if a retailer exclusive variant is a drawing that matches somehow the contents of its issue in character, particularly in story, and isn't necessarily just the Baroness standing there sexy.
Yeah, absolutely. A story-related cover is about 100 times more interesting to me than just another standard kind of posy.
And, Tunnel Rat and Tripwire could stand there sexy. Men can be sexy too. It doesn't just have to be the Baroness or Chameleon or Scarlet.
True. Tripwire's robot helper, McLeod, could also be his own little sexy beast.
Is that someone new for classified toys and not from the 80s?
That's right. Yeah, for the classified toy, they invented a robot helper for Tripwire, which they called McLeod.
Is McLeod going to be friends with Lightfoot's robot helper?
They could well be. They're probably best buds.
I'm hoping for some C-3PO and R2-D2 banter. No, you rust bucket. We have to get back to Master Luke.
Diffuse that bomb. See if I care.
Plot breakdown?
Plot breakdown.
A Joe team of Tunnel Rat, Tripwire and Sherlock are briefed on their mission on a Tomahawk helicopter en route to Trucial Abysmia. Their mission to rescue a 15-year-old activist / politician's daughter abducted by terrorist organization Black Kefia, along with the recently escaped Cobra agent Al Kalbra. The team rendezvous with Mongoose, who is already on scene. He guides them to the enemy bunker. They blow up guards, bunker doors, more guards to get inside and get to the detention cells. The Joes rescue the prisoner to discover it is actually a Benzene Special Forces agent impersonating Leela with a personal grudge against Al Kalbra. The agent, named Samara Bilal, wants to kill Al Kalbra, but the Joes talk her down, and as they evac with Al Kalbra in tow, Sherlock plans to drop both Samara and Al Kalbra back in Benzene. So, Tim, quite short, snappy, one and done, feeling very much like a special missions issue to me.
Yeah, this was also my top-down observation that this comic book feels like it could have been an issue of Special Missions that Marvel published in 1988, or some kind of one-off that IDW published in 2012. And I am reminded, I know this and I think about this regularly, but this was one more reminder that as much as I like Larry Hama's ongoing stories and not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing how A plot, B plot, C plot rise and fall and overlap, Hama is really good at finite 22, or in this modern era, 20-page stories in a way that many writers aren't, and in a way that is really satisfying for G.I. Joe, this brand, this team that has so many characters. And I love seeing one or two of those new Joes from the end of the IDW run. I love seeing Tunnel Rat because in some categories, he's my favorite Joe. And I'm happy for people to see Tripwire because that's got to be someone's favorite Joe. You know, it's not Scarlet, it's not Jinx, it's not Zartan, characters that we see a lot. And I'm happy to see no Cobra, but, some Cobra adjacent characters here. Again, no Destro, no ninjas. And I'm happy to see a mission that feels particularly grounded, that there's no mind control, resurrection, zombie or mutant or ninja. There's, men and women being inserted into a hotspot, and they have this mission. There's that sort of expected surprise where Hama throws a little curveball, oh, the mission isn't quite what we thought, or this person isn't quite who we thought, or, oh, we have to slightly change the mission halfway through. And there's some of that trademark Hama, I don't want to say pessimism, but sort of someone's not getting the full brief about, what's really going on. And then there is some either forgiveness or patience, and someone doesn't take revenge, which is a Hama theme. And, we see Wild Bill show up in a lot of issues, and he tends to just be flying the Tomahawk or the C-130. And if you love Wild Bill, he shows up here. And if you love Roadblock, he shows up. So, there's even 2 cameos. This is the kind of issue that, A, I love. B, I love getting inserted every so often in G.I. Joe. Twice in the IDW run, they just did a run of 5 or 6 issues like this. Single issues that were self-contained, that were focused on either one character or a couple of characters, and not the ongoing story, and less of the sort of ninja stuff we're very used to. And I love the ninja stuff, but I also, G.I. Joe's so many things, and I really want to check back in with the other stuff.
Yeah, I like that point, that the G.I. Joe is and can be so many other things. It can be this sort of very grounded military rescue mission, or it can be ninjas and Mad Max punks against, joining forces with a gold-faced arms dealer to take on a maniacal terrorist in a black supersuit, as happened last issue, and both can be enjoying and entertaining in their own different ways. That there's so much room to do such different things in this world. And the other thing is definitely, it feels like the whole issue is very much we have that segment Hammer Time to kind of call out Larry Hama classical tropes in his writing, and it's almost like the whole issue is like a love letter to Hama tropes. It's like, something on every page.
Stop. Hammer time.
Time to beat the soles of your boots with my face. Sucking chest wounds, red ninjas, brain scanners, rubber oozes, blue ninjas. And then some more sucking chest wounds. Hammer time.
I began writing a list, and within that sort of preamble you added on about another 5 that I hadn't even thought to write down myself. So it is very much sort of playing to what we kind of think of when we think of a Larry Hama's script. While we're there, shall I call out some of the Hamarisms that I saw in the story?
Oh yes.
So we had the lingo, the Joe lingo, and slang that we've seen a few times. So he loves the word mondo. So we've got mondo complicated. We've got the crystal gazers at the Puzzle Palace again. So those are those CIA wonks, as he's called them before. We've got lingo like blooper 40 Mike. We've got a mid-air briefing en route to the mission, so they're not allowed to know their mission until they're on their way, and then they would previously have torn open some sort of manila envelope and had to destroy it on the way. It's a bit more modern now. Sherlock is showing off the briefing on an iPad. I don't know if she needs to destroy that after she's shown the contents. It might be a bit expensive if they do that every time.
I think that's called a Joe Pad.
A Joe Pro is obviously their cameras. That, you touched on this, that there's sort of the Joes are being a little bit kept in the dark on the full intel picture until they're deep into the mission. We've got Wild Bill in the air. We've got Duke and Mainframe back in the pit, and then there's the gear that they're carrying. So there's that great panel where they're reeling off their loadouts. Tunnel Rat is time to gear up. I've got my M60E and my EOD bag. Tripwire's I'm loaded for bear with my 870 Police Magnum 12-gauge Riot and my demolitions kit. And Sherlock is packing an M4 and M92. To call out, because I looked this up, the M60E is a lightweight, improved variant of our regular old M60 that we know and love from the vintage stories. And significantly, it includes a carrying handle on the barrel, which you'll notice in the art.
There's a photo of Larry Hama that he posted on Facebook 10 years ago of him standing in a room filled with guns. Mm-hmm. And
yep.
I'm trying to remember if those are real or props. I think they're props. I think he was at a prop studio that does works for TV and film productions. And I think he was there after the movie that he wrote, Ghost Source Zero, had been finished, and maybe he and some of the people who made that movie were talking about maybe doing something else, something like that. And I think of that photo. I thought of that photo when I read this panel, page 5, panel 1, where these three Joes are calling out their gear. And I say this a lot on Talking Joe, but this is one of those panels that only happens in this comic, and only happens because Larry Hama's writing it. I can't imagine this panel happening in the Energon universe, that, one of the writers who's writing those stories would have those Joes tell each other, but really tell us what they have. And Hama likes the gear. Mm-hmm. And if you like G.I. Joe, there's a good chance you like the gear. And it may not be so specific as what kind of gun and what kind of caliber, but, the action figures have come with all of these accessories. And that is a part of it, in the way that the vehicles are a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the sort of the G.I. Joe from the Energon universe, Tom Riley and co have kitted out the Joes with an array of interesting weaponry, and have obviously done the research to find weaponry that sort of looks modern and interesting and visually different from one another, that kind of thing. But they're not necessarily calling it out in the dialogue.
It reminds me a little bit of how much attention Star Wars comics, shows, and movies pay to lightsabers. Every lightsaber is different, and every Jedi makes their own lightsaber. And in every Star Wars movie and show, when a Jedi drops their lightsaber during a fight, there's an insert shot of the lightsaber like bouncing on the ground nearby. And the Jedi is sort of the weapon. The lightsaber is, it's like, it's his soul, like a samurai sword for a samurai. Like it's so important. And this is not a perfect comparison, but like Cyclops, like Wolverine will, in X-Men comics in the 70s and 80s, like he'll mention his unbreakable adamantium skeleton and his razor sharp claws. Cyclops doesn't like always talk about his force field optic blasts. He uses them and people tend to call them out, but like, man, the Joes like often tell you what gun they're holding.
Tim, how's about a depleted uranium tip discarding Sabot Magnum load to send downrange?
So, the other thing that this reminds me of is that Hama was the editor of Marvel's The Nom for its first, I'm trying to remember, 2 years. And I think after he left Marvel, I think he stayed on sort of as consulting editor for that series for another, I forget, 6 months or a year. And I don't think he had to do a lot of, or maybe any, correcting, because writer Doug Murray was also a vet who had been in Vietnam. But that was a series where the gear that the characters used was specific and important. And they were often talking about how it wasn't of a high quality. And oh, hey, by the way, everyone, Marvel's about to do an omnibus of the first half of the entire run of the Nom. So if you've got...
Oh, crikey.
I don't know, I think it's 150. There's bucks. There's going to be a big hardcover with, I think it's the Nom 1 through 44. The regular cover is Michael Golden's cover for issue 1, and I am so sorry and upset about this. The variant cover is the John Romita, Ron Friends cover from the superhero issue, where Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor are popping out of a map, and it's like one issue in the early run when one of the characters just imagines what would happen if the Avengers were there. And that is not an issue that a lot of readers appreciated, but the editor sure wanted it there. Anyway, back to G.I. Joe. We should talk about Alcabra. Mark, remind us who Alcabra is, when we saw them, and how much you have wanted them to come back.
That's a sort of slightly weighted.
You don't have to do the second half of the answer, but just remind us about Alcabra. We've seen this character once before, and it was in the IDW run, right, during a specific story.
That's right. So in the IDW run, during the Murder by Assassination arc,
that was a 5-parter in the 280s.
Mm-hmm. So I was just looking. So Alcabra first appeared in the Murder by Assassination arc and was the sort of primary antagonist in that arc that ran from issue 281 through to 285 and was mostly illustrated by Andrew Griffith. The arc as well was sort of quite notable for focusing on a number of different sort of new Joes. It introduced Sherlock and introduced her metal arm as well, because in her first appearance she was injured in an explosion and had her arm sort of replaced with this prosthetic. And during the arc, they also introduced a few other new Joes like Malto and Black Hat. And so it was sort of a lot of fun, that arc. I think it was one of the high points of the IDW run, and it sort of really illustrated how skillful Hama could be in sort of just introducing new characters into this sort of long established title. And I think he sort of, got a kick from having these new characters and thinking about where they could go. So Sherlock has appeared a couple of times since, but Alcabra has not.
Alcabra, so that's supposed to sound like Cobra, right? We were supposed to think that this guy either was in Cobra, had been in Cobra, wanted to be in Cobra. And just what's the quick reminder of who that character was in that story?
So he was essentially a sort of like a Middle Eastern, mystery man linked to Alcabra. And the reveal was that he had some connection to Sherlock. And when she, at the very end of the arc, she pulled off his mask, and underneath was a CG. So one of these Fred series Crimson Guardsmen, which is why he looks the way he does in this particular issue when his mask is once again removed.
Why he's a Caucasian guy with red hair.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, if you're missing those issues, because IDW didn't reprint them all, or I know a comic book store, Hub Comics, in Somerville, Massachusetts, that has them. Okay, so, and this is the first time we have seen him since, is it 280?
285, yeah.
Okay. All right. And he did not die at the end of that story. He got away.
No, he was captured.
Aha.
He was captured, which is why when they talk about him in the early bits of the issue, they say he recently escaped from federal custody and is back to his old tricks. Which I thought to myself, oh, that's a bit lame. He's been captured and now he's escaped off panel again. But then they sort of return the toys back into the toy box at the end of this issue because they finish it out with him back in custody once again.
I had the same reaction, that it was a little bit too much of a convenient device that Hama could wave his hand and say, oh yeah, he broke out. Because it seems like everyone breaks out, like they had the commander back in issue 2023. And then isn't the title of issue 24, The Commander Escapes? And he escapes. And
then they caught Storm Shadow. What did he do again?
Right. And then I don't remember how 200 ended, but did Cobra Commander get captured or did he escape? Anyway, but at the same time, Hama's only got 20 pages, and I don't know that I need a 3-parter where we see Alcabra in federal custody plan and execute an escape. I think Hama would execute a fun story, but this is the fastest way to get him back on the board, right? Yeah. Wave your hand, 1 sentence, he's back on the board. And if that gets him back to the series and to face off against Sherlock again and appeases some curious and excited letter writer in the back of the book who's really wanted this character to come back, or who's gently reminding the people who make this book that there's yet another interesting character out there who they can bring back. Great. I want to go back to this idea of this as a fill-in issue, because I think we half covered it. We talked about this as an issue that felt like it could have been special missions, either in the 80s or during the IDW run. What we haven't seen since, issue 153 and 154 and 120, is that the Herb Trimpe issue with the robots before Andrew Wildman comes on? We haven't seen an honest to goodness. I don't think there were any of these in the IDW run. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right? When Jim Shooter gets to Marvel in 1970, 78 or 79, so many of the books at Marvel ship late. And when they ship late, there are fines because they have rented time at the presses to get printed. And then they don't make as much money because they're not on sale for as long. Or if you're supposed to make money off of 12 issues in a year and you only ship 10 or 11, you don't make all the money you're expecting to make. And one of the things Jim Shooter instituted with his editors was having the editors commission fill-in issues. So the regular writer and artist are chugging along, and in case someone gets sick or there are conventions or there's a death in the family, you have sometimes that writer or sometimes a different writer write an issue that if the current issue is running behind, you can bump that a month, give the team a little extra time, and run the issue that is the quote inventory issue that's been sitting in the editor's drawer, done and ready to go. And sometimes an inventory story would be 19 or 20 pages, and there'd be a chance for the regular team to do a bridge page into the inventory issue and a bridge page out of it, so that the story that fills the gap, if it's a little bit out of time, like, oh, this definitely happened last year because of someone's costume. The 2 examples that I think of here are, everyone talks about Demon in a Bottle, the famous Iron Man story where Tony is drinking. And it's a good story. Speaking of G.I. Joe editor Denny O'Neil, he was writing Iron Man at the time. And in like the 3rd chapter, Tony's in New York and he's like, I've got to get to LA right now and help someone. And he starts flying. And then you turn the page in the graphic novel and it's like chapter 3 or chapter 4. And the first page he's flying and he's like, I think I'm going to take this moment to reminisce about how I became Iron Man. And then for 20 pages, it's a retelling of his origin. And then the last page, I can't remember. I think he touches down and he's like, good thing I'm here. And then the next month, the story like actually resumes. Similarly, early on in X-Force, there's an entire issue that Rob Liefeld doesn't draw. He does like the first page. and the last page. And the rest of the issue is Mike Mignola, which is really cool and weird. Okay, so G.I. Joe had a couple of these along the way.
The super specific example for G.I. Joe is issue 143, which was called Dark Island, which was very clearly an inventory issue created super early in the G.I. Joe run, like for year one.
Yeah.
And presumably never needed to be run at that point. And after that point, they either decided the quality wasn't good enough or that it was no longer relevant because it was very much about the year one G.I. Joes. But they still had it in the drawer. And then, back all the way then for 143 in 1993, they decided to run it with a bit of a framing device with Segala in Ninja Forced sort of, I think the plot was something along the lines of, I'm angry that I'm not being accepted properly as a ninja, and that's making me think of this experience that I had all the way back. And so like a page at the beginning, page at the end kind of thing, with this not especially great story in the middle.
And the reason why you don't see these really anymore is because editors, writers, artists are planning so much more for story arcs, for 5 or 6 issues that'll get collected in a nice graphic novel, trade paperback, or 10 or 12 issues. And if you feel like your artist is going to run out of steam or slow down after 4 or 5 or 6 issues, a different artist is going to draw the next arc. And maybe you can have them start a little early. So you do have, or in the case of, Skybound, Void Rivals, Transformers, G.I. Joe, the last 2 years, you just skip a month. And in the 80s at Marvel, that was unthinkable. And nowadays, the market is so different. You're less dependent on the month in, month out, 12 issues a year schedule and budget. And you are taking into account, when the graphic novel will come out. And to a great extent, the quality. Skybound would rather do, no one has said this explicitly, but they've almost said this in the letters pages. But I'm taking a tiny leap here. Skybound would definitely rather do 5 great issues and another 5 great issues in a year. That makes for 2 great graphic novels that aren't compromised, where 20 pages in the middle is drawn by someone else. It's not as good. It's rushed. It's a diversion in the story, because those 2 graphic novels have much longer legs than the month-to-month grind of the series.
But there was one specific example that from what we're talking about, previous examples from the IDW era, which was issue 263, which was called Some Gave All, which was a memorial issue for Fallen Joes. And that came in between... right bang in the middle of the artificial intelligence arc. Right. So it was sitting between part 2 and 3 of the artificial intelligence arc. So it was a bit of an odd issue in the middle of those. What I can't be 100% sure is if that was intended to be an inventory issue. I understand it was meant to be to time in with Memorial Day, which obviously falls at a certain point in the calendar. So it might just have been that was the month that was Memorial Day, and it happened to be in the middle of this other arc. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily, quite like for like in terms of it being an inventory issue, but it's very much a sort of...
A creative decision.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, can we do this other issue? The timing's good.
Yeah, but one that definitely sort of is a solo... is a standalone issue in the middle of a bigger arc, which is pretty much the case of what happened in this one, in terms of we've got an arc in progress, which is broken up by this issue in the middle of it. Because let's not forget, Chris Mooneyham is returning for his final issue with 315.
Yeah, so at the end of 313. Something's about to happen with the Cobra Commander and Destro and Joe stuff in Springfield. And then they say, next month we're going to take a moment where Tonorat goes on this mission drawn by this other guy. And then at the end of the letters page of this issue, 314, editor Alex Toney says, that's it for this month. Chris Mooneyham returns next month for a bridge issue between the Springfield invasion arc and the next ARAH storyline. And So in a really fun, retro way, this issue reminds me of fill-ins at Marvel and DC in the 80s and 90s. But many of those were frustrating because they were a scramble and you could see some kind of compromise. And what I see here is some months ago, editor Alex Antone, I think, and Larry Hama and Chris Mooneyham are figuring out how fast they can produce, with Hasbro involved. And they see the schedule about to sort of get pinched. And someone says, why doesn't Hama write an extra issue? And someone says, why doesn't someone else draw, probably Alex Antone, draw this extra issue, not Mooneyham or Paul Pelletier, and we can slot it in a few months as needed. And because it's Hama and not sort of anyone else, and because it's someone who Skybound has picked who's good, and because that guy's coming back, so he seems that much more in the finger quotes G.I. Joe family. And also because the Springfield invasion arc, it wasn't in the middle, it was mostly over. I don't feel like this is a big intrusion. I feel like this is a fun sidestep. And, if you squint and tilt your head a little bit, I can imagine some of these pages from this issue getting run in the previous 2 issues as a B story before the story takes center stage. And we had noted in the previous, 2 issues, that it was all A story. We were really just in Springfield, and we weren't, cutting over to Antarctica and also a submarine by Australia where, some Joes are starting some other mission. Okay, with all that context in place for how different this issue is, Mark, let's talk about the actual story and the actual art.
Where would you like to start? The actual story, I don't think we've seen this necessarily in the pages of ARAH for a little while, but it feels like Hama is sort of taking some inspiration from the real world headlines. So I do get the sense that possibly he's looking at the Palestine conflict and using that as a bit of a jumping off point for inspiring a story set in the different universe of G.I. Joe. So we've not, I don't think it doesn't feel like we've seen that from Hama for a little while. So that's interesting to see.
Yeah, my sense of world history and geography has always been okay, and I don't have a perfect lineup for which of Hama's fictional countries are analogs for which other real countries. I'm pretty sure that Barovia is Germany, but maybe it's, sort of half Germany and half, something else. Barovia, I don't think it was, was it divided into Eastern Barovia? Anyway, Eastern Barovia and West. But Benzine and Trussel Abysmia, Benzine was effectively Kuwait, right? Because Cobra invades it for its oil in 1991. And so, yes, some of this feels like reflecting specific world events right now from the last year, but also not moving the map, not inventing a country to be one more stand-in, but mixing some elements and geographies. This issue feels fast. Like the last 2 issues, it's all A story. The sort of closest thing you have to a B story is cutting to Duke and Mainframe back in the pit for a panel or 2. But that's not actually a B story. That's just the A story quickly changing location. But, if you're going to do a 20-page fill-in, you're not going to set up a B plot and a C plot. And this issue feels, I don't know quite what the word is, sort of linear. They go there, they do it, they leave. And then Hama sprinkles on top of it the differences or the surprise, so this element that when they get there, the person that they think they're rescuing, it's this word balloon We're on page 11, panel 2. What have you done? You've ruined everything, says the kidnapped kid that just rescued, right? It was all going according to plan, and now I have to improvise and start from scratch, as she grabs an AK-47 or a Kalashnikov. And I think, I shouldn't have been surprised by that. Like, Hama was going to do that, and I think a lot of writers would do that, because it's much more interesting if your characters get there and the mission suddenly turns on its head. You know, it's like, you're not who we were expecting. Like, it's a bomb, it's a robot, it's a double, it's a clone. It's not the innocent person we were going to save. It's some terrible, guilty villain. And now what do we do? Or in this case, it's a double. And this is another place where Hama is using, I think in this case, less specific real world 2025 news, but sort of historical elements where heads of state have had body doubles. And maybe, they send someone out to do a parade or to stand from afar and not quite give a speech. And they're safe inside because it's dangerous, or I don't know, because they're lazy. I don't know. And then you have this, at the end of this page 11, Sherlock says, that is no 15-year-old. And behind Sherlock, this person who's not who they were actually going to rescue is loading and clicking the AK-47. And anytime Larry Hama puts a kid with a machine gun in a comic, which we have seen a couple times in G.I. Joe from all three publishers, I think of Kid Death and Muffy and Fluffy. Weren't there two stories in Savage Tales?
Yeah, I think that's right. Isn't it Kid Death and Fluffy?
Kid Death and Fluffy, and Death is DETH. And Hama edited his own anthology, Savage Tales, the one that he contributed to. Denny O'Neil was the editor, and what I was thinking of is Bizarre Adventures, and it's Dr. Death with Kip and Muffy. It's Hama, I think, wrote and drew one of them, and I think Hama wrote and co-drew one of them in this black and white Marvel magazine. And it's an excuse for Hama to draw and write like a kid with a gun and like motorcycles and babes. And it's in the future, sort of Mad Max. And that's not what's happening here. One of those 5 things is happening here. But also, whereas I'm sort of smiling like, oh, it's fun. Hama's got a kid with a machine gun. And it turns out to be, what is she? She's not 15, but she's 22 or 23. What Hama is also referring to here is that in conflict zones, kids do defend themselves and their families or their side. And it's not just the adults like G.I. Joe and Cobra who are doing the fighting. So a little of this is fun, and a little of this is a reminder of, actual warfare, which is this delicate line that G.I. Joe has always walked. All right, so Mark, we see Alcabra and a very powerful panel when Samara Bilal says to Alcabra, "You murdered my whole family." And then says, I'm going to enjoy killing you, and sticks a pistol in his mouth. And I'm pleasantly surprised that Skybound and Hasbro were okay with this scene. I can imagine in a slightly different era from a different publisher, maybe the scene would have to get rewritten or drawn a little bit differently. Now, she doesn't pull the trigger. She does not spread your brains out on the floor. But, we've noted that the Skybound Real American Hero is a little bit bloodier and harsher than the IDW one. And I think we've heard from someone who is there that Skybound has been okay with this.
Yeah, indeed.
And then the part of us that wants characters to get their righteous revenge and the villains to get their comeuppance, right? So Alcabra is going back to prison. And that second to last panel of this whole issue on page 20 is really satisfying because Bilal, this college student who's had plastic surgery to look like the kid, who was going to get kidnapped, and so gets kidnapped to infiltrate and take out Alcalbra. In the second to last panel, Alcalbra is handcuffed with his hands behind his back, sitting in the back of the tomahawk, and Bilal is pressing her shoe against his face and pointing the machine gun at his gut, right? And Sherlock says, we're going to drop you and your prisoner off. And she says, thanks. So actually, wait a minute. Mark, are we certain that at the end of the story, Alcalbra is going back into custody?
I read this as being that he's going into custody, but possibly not the custody that the Joe team were expected to bring him back to. So he's not being returned back to the Flag and then presumably back to a prison in America, but instead is going to be a prisoner in Benzine. Mm-hmm. So objective, mission accomplished. He's been captured. He's going to go in a prison, but he's maybe going to receive Benzini justice rather than American.
Right. Let's talk about the art, because we have made such a fuss about this new guy who's been around for a while, actually. Andrew Krahnke. His art is, in a very general sense, a good fit for G.I. Joe, right? He can draw vehicles, weapons, all these different kinds of characters. He draws on page 1, he draws Roadblock as a much bigger person than the other characters, which is a small thing. I always appreciate it. If you're drawing X-Men and you draw Colossus, you got to draw him bigger and taller than the other ones. And Krahnke's storytelling, his visual flow of what's happening, from top to bottom and left to right is clear and exciting and dramatic. There don't seem to be any shortcuts, or it doesn't seem like he's trying to avoid drawing something that's hard. There are, many panels per page. There doesn't seem to be any page where he's like drawing a flashy giant panel where someone's just standing there looking cool as if it's a cover at the expense of the other story beats happening on that page. And, anatomy, perspective, explosions, it all looks good. He also uses a lot of black ink, which I appreciate for a couple reasons. One, I like my comics sort of traditional, the way that comics looked from, say, between 1936 and, 2000. I like artists and inkers who are inking as if the work might be reproduced in black and white, but will also work if colored. And so you have core shadows and chiaroscuro and spot blacks, like debris in the background or someone's cloak or hood might be blacked out, and you're not giving all of the space over to the color artist to maybe do gradients or maybe not, though that sometimes is also a good look depending on the book. G.I. Joe should have some grit, and while Krahnke draws sort of handsome and pretty faces, I think sort of on the scale of Paul Pelletier and Chris Mooneyham, Krahnke's in the middle and closer to Paul Pelletier. Pelletier draws, and I mean this as a compliment, right? Sort of handsome and pretty faces. Even when someone's, firing a weapon or getting punched, there is some grit in how he draws, but his stuff is a little slicker and tight. And Mooneyham's stuff is a little looser and a little, this word feels imprecise, but sort of dirtier. And Krahnke is in the middle, but it all works. It all looks good. And, if he was suddenly the series artist, if those other two guys were too busy or got other work and Krahnke stuck around for 5 or 10 issues, I would say, great. So Mark, how has Andrew Krahnke's art and storytelling in this issue reached you?
Yeah, I think similar to your thoughts. It's always interesting to see a new artist tackle Joe. Sometimes it's obviously more successful than others, but I think just seeing the variety and just seeing the interpretation is always going to be interesting, if nothing else. And as we've talked about before, it's a different comic. It's got a lot of challenges about you know, the scenery, the gear, the vehicles, the giant cast of characters, all of that kind of stuff. I think it's got demands on its artists more or different demands than a lot of the other books. I think the storytelling is very clear, and so that sort of scale of Mooneyham to Pelletier was an interesting comparison. I think, yeah, as you say, somewhere in the middle. I think he's very much trying to service the story rather than necessarily make each page look flashy or something. A splash that would make an individual page more sellable than a page that is actually just trying to tell the story at hand.
You mean sellable as a piece of original art, not like selling the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, he's not taking shortcuts. Sort of most panels are crammed to the gills with one thing or another, and you know, there are times asking him to, you know, for example, design a street scene, a detailed street scene, which will be seen for just one panel on one page and never seen again, kind of thing. It's a lot to ask of an artist, and I think he pulls it off quite well. I think in terms of the style, there's a little bit of cartooning there
in the faces.
In the faces, and sort of some of the exaggeration on the expressions and stuff like that, and it reminds me a little bit of Brian Shearer in some ways,
yeah,
from that respect. But yeah, I think he did an admirable job for this.
I think he did an
this particular
admirable
issue.
keel-haul job. I want to call out.
There we go. There's an Easter egg. You don't see him very much in the pages of the comic.
Oh yeah, he gets one panel.
Yeah.
I want to call out a pair of panels and another pair of panels as an example of something Krahnke does that I like. On page 1, the second panel is a little bit of sort of background stuff, like a doorway on the left, and then just a thin horizontal line, which is the deck of the flag, but it sort of just reads as a cast shadow. And you see 3 Joes running and the tomahawk. And this is one of those panels. It's kind of a vignette panel where there isn't a full outline on all 4 sides that end the panel and create a difference between the panel and the gutter. And I also want to talk about Francesco Segala's color work in this issue. So this first example, it goes hand in hand with that. But this is something that we've definitely seen in some Chris Mooneyham pages, and I think we have seen in some Paul Pelletier pages, where in this case, Krahnke draws a foreground and a middle ground, but no background and no lasso, no rectangular lasso all around the panel. It happens again on page 3 when Sherlock is tapping the iPad, the Joe pad, and says, "That's ARAH, tunnel rat." And in leaving the background completely blank, Krahnke is not like phoning it in and saying like, "That's too complicated, I don't want to draw that." What he's doing is he's creating negative space that becomes slightly activated in a way that other negative space doesn't. It creates a place for your eye to slow down or rest on a page. It just creates some visual interest. I don't think it's super important for pacing. I think just as we're taking in these pages filled with panels, characters, word balloons, information, it's just a place where there's less information. And then because he does this, and color artist Segala doesn't fill that background with some gradient or solid color, or doesn't like silhouette in some shapes, like dark blue and medium blue for like buildings or, other ships behind the flag, just leaves it white. It again reinforces this idea of less information, just a panel with less busyness, so you can focus on them running, you can focus on her tapping her device. And I don't know that this is something necessarily that they teach at the Kubert School. I'm going to sort of guess, having not looked at Krahnke's other comics before reading this issue, that in looking at previous issues of G.I. Joe from this run before drawing this issue, I'm going to guess that Krahnke thought, oh, maybe I'll do that negative space background white thing that, Mooneyham has done a couple times. So I appreciate that. And then I just want to go forward to page, all right, 8 was the one. Okay, page 9. The top 2 panels 1 and 2, we're looking up past 3 bad guys who are progressively starting to go up and going up stairs. And then on the top, further away, Tripwire and Tunnelrod have come in. This place is huge and crawling with bad guys, right? And then one of the bad guys yells something. And then the next panel is a reverse angle. And we are now above and behind Tunnel Rat, sort of a downward over the shoulder shot, as he, with his machine gun, takes out not just the 3 guys we just saw, but a 4th one too, right? Maybe it's not literally all 4 of them. It's 3 of them, and we can assume all 4 of them. And I think generally, if you go to school at the Kubert School, you really learn how to lay out pages and tell story, right? I like that point you made about Krahnke's art is in service of the story, not necessarily his own drawing style or flashiness for selling an original page. And Krahnke didn't invent the reverse shot. Hama didn't invent it. That's from film from a century ago. But this is just a small example of, and this might get specifically called out in Hama's plot. Hama might have written looking up past 3 bad guys at 2 Joes. Reverse angle, looking past Joes, down at bad guys, now getting shot. But Krahnke does it, and just as a sort of a small example of all of the good storytelling in this issue, I find this satisfying. And also, it's one of these tiny bits where Hama sets up something and then creates closure, right? He introduces 2 Joes into this physical location and some bad guys, and then you get to see what happens in the next moment. They shoot them. Okay, so I want to talk about color for a minute. Color artist Francesco Segala continues what he's been doing in the previous year of this comic with some subtle, sort of old-fashioned Ben-Day dot textures within the colors. If you look up close at people's complexions, you don't just see sort of like a muted skin color, you also see a pattern of dots. Segala is recalling old printing techniques from the last century.
Can you give me a specific example of where you're seeing that a bit?
Yeah, it's really subtle. I gotta get my face way up close.
Okay.
Page 3. Yeah. The top of the first panel where we're looking at Sherlock's face.
I can see sort of zooming in. It's a bit more apparent. But it's relatively subtle, and it feels it's less a sort of slightly less ostentatious use of those techniques than maybe he had in all the way back in issue 301.
Yes. Okay, so this is one of the points that I'm coming to with Segala's work on this issue. It's handsome, it's good. It does look like previous issues. And there are these color shifts from one place or scene to another, right? So, on page 2, there's a certain pages 1 and 2, right? There's a certain color when we're outside on the flag. There's a certain color inside the tomahawk, right? There's more red there. And there's a certain color in the control tower with Keelhaul and Shipwreck, right? That's like aqua. And Segala keeps doing that as places change. And sometimes it's motivated by light. A couple pages when the Joes land, right? And they meet Mongoose. There's a fire. So that scene has a lot of orange in it. So he's doing the sort of color shifting that he has been doing on the series. The coloring here does feel, you used a good word, less ostentatious. The color on this issue does feel less active, less, I don't want to say busy or exciting, less active than in the first 5 issues on Mooneyham and the first issue or 2 on Pelletier. And I think maybe two things are happening here. Something about Mooneyham's use of black and how many shifts there were in location gave a lot of license in those first 5 issues to Segala doing a lot of those textures and a lot of like, this scene is blue, this scene is green, this scene is red, this scene is beige. And those first 2 issues that Paul Pelletier drew, Segala wasn't adjusting his color approach. And because there was less like black inking in Tony Cordos's finishes, some of those colors in those first 2 issues by Pelletier came across like as candy and less as like interesting color choices. They started to feel too stylized, and I liked them, but I felt like the colors and the art were fighting a little bit. Mm-hmm. With Pelletier's 3rd issue, Segala backs off a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I love that decision. I wish it had happened in the first issue, but this thing is moving every month and everyone's like learning to work with each other. And I feel like this issue, having now gone back to coloring Mooneyham, Segala immediately shifts gears into how he colors Pelletier in those 3rd, 4th, and 5th issues. And there's a lot less sort of editorializing and stylizing of color here. Like you get a couple panels where someone's in the foreground and they're just kind of purple because that separates them from the middle ground and background, which is like kind of green. But Segala did a lot more of that and a lot more purple with Mooneyham. I also wonder if this issue was colored a little faster than previous issues, because it is a handsome issue. There just seem to be some fewer flourishes and differences from panel to panel and scene to scene. Nothing looks rushed. Nothing looks unfinished. It does look a little less finessed than previous issues. And, one of the marks of a professional is that they can do a good job in whatever amount of time they're given. I wonder if this issue, not a rush job, I wonder if this issue, maybe at the coloring stage, had a little less breathing room than some previous issues. And, if this issue was colored in the same month that Segala was coloring another issue of G.I. Joe to sort of get ahead of the schedule. And he's coloring books for DC, right? I think he's coloring another book for Image, I think. I don't know his schedule. So I do like this issue, and I do think his art is a good match. I do think his colors are a good match for a Krahnke. I do feel like the colors in this issue are a little less exciting than the previous issues.
Yeah, sort of. It feels like to some degree there's less flourishes or less. Did you use that word? I think you might have done.
I did. You can use it again.
Yeah.
Makes me sound fun.
It feels like there's maybe less experimentation on the page, a bit less room to just do something a little bit more unexpected and that kind of thing.
Let's talk about SFX, baby. Let's talk about pew and scree. Let's talk about shooting gun things and the sound effects. We'll see. Let's talk about SFX. Let's talk about SFX.
We haven't talked about sound effects. So previously I was giving some credit to letterer Pat Brousseau for some hand-lettered, although I think done digitally, sound effects. And then I think you corrected me after we recorded that episode that those were Mooneyham, boom, rat-tat-tat, smack, punch, crack. I don't know who did them. I'm going to guess it's Andrew Krahnke here, but I don't know. But, if you jump to page 13, Tripwire is using the shotgun, boom, Tunnel Rat's using his big machine gun, rat-a-tat, the depleted uranium-tipped discarding Sabbat Magnum load comes out of the shotgun, choom, and then the sound of that going through 3 filing cabinets, clang, pang, and through a person, shpack. I've said this before, and I'll say it again and again. I don't think that sound effects make comics look amateurish or kiddie. Yes, if you ask me, does blam seem like the perfectly appropriate sound effect for a gunshot? No, not always. Or sock, pow for punches. But But this is part of the visual language of comics, and I think that comics that, as a rule, don't have sound effects are limiting themselves. And I think it's one more thing you can use to describe a scene and to make differences. Like, well, you might draw someone who's big and evil differently than you draw someone who's big and good, and you might color them differently. And if they, like kick down a door, what is the door made of? How hard is the kick? How do you want the audience to feel? Different sound effects can describe that for the audience. And I generally think comic books should have sound effects.
Yeah, some nice effects here. And they do look organic, kind of hand lettered. And my guess would be that, it's Krahnke, but we can hopefully find out.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
Can we talk about the mistake on page 8, which so bums me out?
So this is the page with the door being blown off.
Yeah. So this is where the nitpicker musical.
Before you, because I didn't really notice a mistake, but I noticed something that I didn't especially like from this issue. So I wonder if it's the same thing or different. Shall I go with what I didn't appreciate on this page?
Yeah,
and then we'll see if it's the same as what you thought. It was the sequencing of the that little circular panel with the trigger being clicked and it going click, which sort of reading left to right looks like it comes after the whoomph of the door being blown off. So the thing that, just in terms of that normal, down, left to right reading experience, it was just a little bit too far down and too much, to the right of the door. So it kind of needed to be positioned differently, maybe to the left of the door being blown off or something, just to show one follows the other. So that was my relatively minor nitpick. I didn't even write it down in my notes because I thought it was a little bit in the weeds there. But what about you, Tim?
No, I think that's fair. I don't think that's too in the weeds. My take on this is that if every page of an issue is left to right, top to bottom, if you one time on one page don't follow that, it's unfair, sort of reads as a mistake. And I do know that, and I don't think anyone should put in arrows, like leading your eye literally from one panel over a gutter to another. I think that's too much of a device, and cheat is too strong, but I don't think those work. But there is a sense amongst some comics that if the artwork is really leading you against the left to right, top to bottom hierarchy, that if you're going the quote wrong way, because like Batman's cape or like Leonardo pointing and holding his sword in a narrow horizontal panel, like, oh, I'm supposed to read the word balloons from right to left for this one panel because I'm resetting to the left side of the page. I think sometimes it can work. Generally, I don't want anyone to ever do it because I follow that other rule, left to right, top to bottom, uniformly. I think, yes, there's a simple fix here, which is you pick up this inset circle that says click and you just move it all the way over to the left side of the sound effect. You take whoomp and the actual door falling, you shrink it to 70%, you move it to the right, and you have a less visually interesting graphical layout of a page, but one that does follow the left to right, top to bottom hierarchy more fairly. No, my problem, and the reason why I didn't even notice your problem, because I was so upset by the problem in panel 1, is that Tunnel Rat says, that's one solid door, Tunnel Rat. And then Sherlock says, not a prob, Sherlock, just stand back, get behind cover, and cover your ears. Okay, so the word balloons are pointing to the wrong people. So that first word balloon on the top left needs to point to the other character, and then the two word balloons over her need to point to the first character. Now, there's an additional problem. Because if you just redo the arrows, the tails, where they're pointing, the tails are going to not physically cross like an X, but they're going to sort of, in their vectors, aim crossing over each other. And a good letterer could figure that out. You know, you like move one down, you move one over a little bit, it would be fine. What I actually think should happen with this panel is that you take the entire panel and you left-right mirror it so that Sherlock is now on the left side pointing to the right, and Tunnel Rat is now on the right side looking, he's still kind of in the center, but instead of looking left, he'd be looking right. And then you kind of keep the word balloons where they are. And this has an added benefit because panels 2 and 3 and 4 and 6, in all those panels, Tunnel Rat is looking to the right. But in the first panel, the one with the big lettering error, Tunnel Rat is looking to the left. And so to keep his screen direction consistent on the page, and it's not confusing. I'm not like, where did he go? Like, he doesn't actually have to look in the direction of right for every panel on this page, but it wouldn't hurt, and it would provide a little more sort of space cover for those word balloons to get fixed. And I was so distressed by this because I'm such a comics nerd and G.I. Joe fan. I read this issue the night before it was on sale because I own a comic book store, and I took it home before it was technically on sale, and no one can stop me from doing that. I didn't sell it. I did not break sales embargo, but I took it home and I read it. But I read it in bed right before going to sleep. And this panel mistake so bothered me that I slept very poorly all night.
Oh, no.
And I woke up and an email that I have had a draft form half written to Skybound for a month about typos in G.I. Joe comics, both Real American Hero and Energon Universe. I spent a little time the next day finishing that and ending with this as sort of a bigger example. And, I get it. People make mistakes. Making comics is hard. And there's this assembly line. It's got to go from this person to that person. And sometimes, I'm writing a big thing right now. And sometimes I save a file and then someone makes a suggestion and I save a file and I realize, I think I actually sent my friend editor not today's version of the file, but yesterday's version of the file. Like, oh no, he's reading not the most up-to-date one. Or, I saved it as a different file name and I actually reintroduced an error that we had both fixed, last week. I know this is all hard, but man, Skybound, come on, you're Skybound. There's so many pairs of eyes looking at this, and also Hasbro. So I'm putting my hands together, I'm clasping them together and shaking them in a please, please, please. I hope you can no more mistakes like this, please, ever. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't think the easy fix is necessarily flipping this panel because the hinges of the door on the left, and then you need that to be kept consistent. So
very good.
It does feel like if you needed to fix this in a pinch, the best way to do it would be to just change the words so that they make sense for Tunnel Rat to say the first thing and Sherlock to say the second thing, and I'm sure that could be accomplished.
Yes, there are 6 or 7 or 8 different ways to fix this. Change the dialogue, slightly change the art, move the word balloons, a combination. I'm fine with all of them. I'm fine with any of them. Hey, how about that letters page, Mark?
Yeah, some great letters in this issue again. Shall I read out one of them?
Yes. I just want to point out, everyone. So it's 2 pages of letters, and there's a British Mark who writes the last letter on the first page. But that's not you. But when you turn the page, I got excited. I thought, hey, it's Mark. He got another letter in a G.I. Joe Skybound comic. And then I thought, no, this isn't him. And then I turned the page,
Well, I read the first page and I was like, a Mark from London in UK, that people are going to think that that's me and it's not even me. And then I turn the page, I'm like, oh, there's an even better Mark on the second page who writes this. Dear Alex, Larry and crew, 308 was a great landmark issue. We finally get the payoff of the Springfield invasion that this run has been building towards. But it was a quieter moment that caught my attention. The Serpentor-like body in cold storage on Cobra Island. Given that we last saw the original Serpentor in issue 213, what does this mean? And what might it mean for Snake Eyes, who fell to his death at the same time? We forget that sometimes Dr. Mindbender himself is a clone, brought back to life. I wonder if there are other Cobras in cold storage waiting a return. Speaking of which, will we see some other named Cobras besides Cobra Commander, Serpentor and Mindbender anytime soon? I enjoyed the recent introductions of Alcabra and Overkill, and there is certainly some mystery behind these characters I would like to see explored. Has anyone else noticed the absence of Hawk? I guess he's been busy with the political fallout of the various invasions, political assassinations, corporate wrongdoings, and mutant bomb explosions that the Joes have been fighting on the ground. Having that senator with oversight of the Joes still brainwashed by Cobra can't help. I've not even mentioned Throwdown, the mystery of Helix's mother, the tease of seeing Zartan's origins, the mystery of codename Cerebral Laundry, checking in with the new Joes, or how Dawn is coping with Snake Eyes' memories. I guess that's a good problem to have when you've got such a great cast of characters written so well. If only we could have more Joe from Larry. Until next time, yo Joe. From Mark, Talking Joe, Seddon.
And then editor Alex Antone responds, Yo Mark, glad to hear you've been paying attention. You got an Alcabra appearance in this very issue, so that's fortuitous timing. But of course I cannot answer any of your questions. That said, expect more Throwdown in issue 315 and beyond. Larry is working
You need to answer one of my questions.
Larry is working on a very cool storyline that follows up on the last time we saw him and puts him and the other ninjas in an unexpected situation. Mark, congratulations on another letter printed. That's neat. I cynically wonder, geez, does this mean no one's writing letters? It's like, are like 7 people writing letters every month, and every other time you write a letter, they're going to print it because they're getting so few? I don't actually think that's the case. I think it's a combination of you writing consistently good letters, like the kind that they want to print. You know, it's not all praise. There's a question. It's not all criticism. And I also think that, no, that's it. I don't think it's a combination of things. I think it's those things. Interesting that you are not the only person who noted the potential continuity challenge or gaffe of this Serpentor corpse that has the eye damage. Sort of that can't be that Serpentor who it says it is, because Serpentor was cloned without it and then fell down a chasm and is dead. So why would it have it? But Larry has already explained that away with some retro continuity hand waving. Was that 2 issues ago when someone said, no, that's a little like piece of makeup I applied to confuse people. Right. Yeah,
it was resolved relatively quickly. I can't remember how long it had.
And that's fine. I kind of feel like Alex Antone or continuity cop Diana Davis. Let me try it again. Or continuity cop Diana Davis said, "Oh wait. If that dead Serpentor has that eye damage, that doesn't make sense." And Larry said, "Oh well, okay, one sentence." Taken care of. This is not like a big thing so that the Joes can go into that chasm under the pit and like pull up the rotting Serpentor corpse and the rotting Snake Eyes corpse and like do something with it. It's like, all right, I'll just fix that. I was happy I didn't know that Alcabra was going to be in this issue. So I was happy for you because I know that you have been interested in a return appearance. Maybe because specifically you like that character, or maybe because just as a standard, when Larry introduces a new thread, you want it to come back sooner than later. And that was the villain of a 5-issue arc. And I think also there's another thing happening where we want to feel like what Hama did during the IDW run of 156 to 300 counts. And of course it does. It's the same series. It's the same continuity. But I we all noticed a little bit of a reset with issue 301. Like Snake Eyes had come back, even though Hama had said several times he's definitely not coming back. And, things are a little bit grittier, more violent. And some characters who had challenges in the IDW issues haven't shown up again, or those challenges haven't shown up again. And I don't actually think Hama's saying to himself, the IDW stuff doesn't count. And I certainly don't think anyone at Skybound is saying, Larry, don't count that IDW stuff. Don't talk about it. I think Hama is always juggling the 78 different character threads and props and story lines that were set up 2 issues ago, 20 issues ago, 200 issues ago, with just wanting to tell a story that takes place right now with some favorite characters. The ninjas are going to go on a little mission. And they're not going to talk to anyone from 20 issues ago. And they're not going to finalize a thread, we haven't seen Scrap Iron. What's he been up to? Or what about Helix's mom? I actually don't even remember that. Can you do a quick reminder? What is that?
So he, in the pages of Silent
Option.
Silent
the
Option.
4-issue miniseries that ran alongside regular issues of G.I. Joe around 260, drawn by Anito Diaz, written by Hama.
So that is where Helix got introduced, and they had some flashbacks to her home setup, and it hinted that her mother was taught by the Blind Master, and then later on there's an encounter between Helix and a Revanche robot, Betty the casino bot, who and there the Revanche robot is using moves that Helix noted were the same ones that her mother taught her. So there was a hint that there was some sort of connection between Helix's mother and Revanche, which was an interesting little thread that hasn't yet been followed up on.
I think it's also possible that Hama uses a character or sets up an idea months and years ago, and then thinks of it again recently, or someone says it to him or in the letters page, and he thinks, I didn't like where that was going, or, I didn't love that character. So maybe I'm not going to bring them back in immediately. He has also said, I think he has said this on Facebook, or maybe in an IDW's letters page, sometimes he just gets the idea to use a character because the toy's in front of him. And, if you have probably seen, dear listeners, over the years on Facebook, Larry posts a photo of his desk. And, there's like a Bucky O'Hare figure. Maybe it's a boss fight one. Maybe it's a Hasbro one. A Storm Shadow mini bust, and then like a Snake Eyes figure, and then like a Snake Eyes classified figure. But I'm not saying if you give him a figure of your favorite obscure Joe at a convention that he'll put it on his desk, and then a year later that character will show up in an issue. But
it might.
It might. And I also think that when Carson Metaxas created his posters 10, 15 years ago of just a nice photo of every G.I. Joe figure from, it was like 82 to 85 or 86, and then like the next 4 years. Mm-hmm. And he did versions, I think, with everyone's name and without everyone's name. This was when he was building 3djoes.com. And it was a white poster with just nicely lit photos of each figure fully geared up in a grid, but without actual black lines of a grid. And at one of the shows, Carson gave both posters to Hama. And, it was at Hama's apartment. a year or two or three later, and one of them was up on the wall, and that was like, and I think he even said so somewhere. It's like, oh, that's a helpful bit of reference, because like, yes, of course he can like stand up, walk over, pull up a book off the shelf, or go to yojo.com or 3djoes.com and like get ideas. But I think we all know the phenomenon of like, you're sitting at your computer and you need to look up something, and it's like, I could go downstairs and look up something, or I could just Google it. And if I Google it, it might take longer, but I don't have to stand up. I'm talking about me, not Larry here. And now I'm talking about Larry. Maybe he just turns and says, oh, there's that poster. Like, oh yeah, I'll use Lightfoot. Congratulations on getting another letter. I won't be bothered by the 2 spelling errors, because I'm sure that starting immediately, not only are the editors at Skybound going to be much more careful about word balloons and lettering, but even typos in fan mail, because I do think that if because I have sent in a letter that got printed and there was a word missing, and I would have been very happy if they'd figured out what I was trying to say and just added that word back in. I do grant that permission, and I do feel like in the history of magazines and newspapers, they're allowed to do that. This short episode was as long as a normal episode. I'm sorry. Listeners, for uninteresting reasons, Mark had pitched that we do a shorter episode for this one. And, if I'm going to talk for 25 minutes about a single cover, it's not going to happen. I mean, the ammo belts on Tunnel Rat on Andy Kubert's cover, notice how every 4th bullet is colored red, like a tracer. Hama has talked about this. This is one of those gear things. Like, oh wow, Hama definitely called that out for Kubert or Diana Davis, or Diana Davis thought, oh wait, is Larry going to want the something? Every 4th bullet is actually a tracer round, so you can see where it's going. Like, hey, Laura Martin, or just provided a photo. Like, the gun belt should look like this.
Okay, those aren't Crayola crayons then.
That would be fun cosplay. I have one time in my life, very briefly, dressed up as a G.I. Joe character. And I will say that the grenades were limes. Because I don't have grenades in my kitchen, but I do have citrus. Are we done now? Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast?
Yeah, if you were playing the Tiger Force version of that character, you could have used lemons. Next time on Talking Joe, we will be covering the latest issue of G.I. Joe as the Skybound era of ARAH continues, with 315 released. 1 month's time, no waiting about. It's 26th of March, 2025. Plus, of course, we will be exploring the Energon universe and covering the Energon universe G.I. Joe issues as they come out. Plus dipping and diving and ducking and weaving all around the world of G.I. Joe comics, with some other unexpected episodes, interviews, and more. So do keep your eyes peeled. So if you want to find us, we are on talkingjoe.co.uk. That is the website that points to the places we can be found. Those include Facebook group, Twitter, Instagram. You can leave us voicemail notes. And you can also join us on Patreon, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So a big thanks to all of our backers, who include Richard, Sam, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Chris, Simon, Joe, Craig, Frank, Mike, and Dee, plus our 2 new members, a second Shane. I hope there isn't going to be any inter-Shane rivalry or Shane Civil War, anything like that.
Shane, there's enough Talking Joe to go around.
And Infinite Entertainment. They are getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. Tim, where can you be found when you're not talking to me about inventory issues that take place in between arcs of A Real American Hero?
Or during arcs.
During arcs.
Video essays on television and film on our YouTube channel. That's at Atomic Abe. I have a comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts, Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Great stuff. And finally, with that short episode done, I think we just have to remember that...
Nobody Beats Talking Joe, an international podcast!
Laters.